Let's talk a little bit about Hippie Taoism. Um, like in my youth or before my youth, um, you know, maybe even pre-baby boom, there was quite a fad for Eastern thought, as people called it then, um, perhaps. And it fed into this kind of hippie counterculture stuff. Um, I was a little too young to really be a hippie. Uh, okay, I was born in '58, so in '68, like ground zero of hippiedom, I guess. I was 10. Had older siblings though, step siblings. But anyway, uh, but I was brought up. Like I went to a hippie high school, 16 kids in a storefront, a free school, Bonzo Ragamuffin Prep. And Lord, like the staff, the hippies that were running that school, who all got busted for contributing to the delinquency of minors later on when the school ended. They were reading Alan Watts' The Way of Zen and many, many other sources in Eastern philosophy, especially and religion, especially sources in Hinduism, such as the Upanishads, but especially focused on Zen or Chan Buddhism and Taoism. So, I mean, one thing I'm interested in this course is, or I want to be interested in or discuss in this course is, to some extent, on some level, the Western interpretation or appropriation, if you want to look at it in a currently prejudicial manner, pejorative manner, of Taoism and Eastern Asian philosophies, Chinese philosophies, for example, in general. Okay, so first of all, it's a problematic activity, right? Like, let's just go, like, sort of grab a bunch of texts, maybe look at translations, and then from far outside the history and the culture, start declaring what it means. I have this problem, right? I am teaching Chinese philosophy, and I've never been to China. All right, I don't fluently read the language. I took a stab a couple times, but didn't get that far. Only in terms of like maybe looking at specific characters that are central to the philosophies of Taoism and Confucianism, especially. All right. So, but why? What does it do for me or for Western culture? And in doing something for me or Western culture, what do I do to it? How do I distort it with regard to like my needs? Now, I just do also want to remark, however, that I've never been to Greece either, actually. I don't read ancient Greek either, although I had somewhat of a stab at that at a certain point in grad school, I guess. But I didn't get very far with that either. And how they were living in Athens in 400 BC is not much like they're living in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 2021. Okay? Like I mean, how much do I really know about the culture of Prussia in Kant's time? What is my culture? Okay. One thing I'll say is like I say, my hippie teachers were talking about this stuff and teaching it too, to the extent we had classes. I was exposed to this before I was exposed to ancient Greek philosophy. It seems natural to me. It's a complex situation, I acknowledge. Now, I've often taught this kind of material to Chinese students. Okay, now that makes for a real complex, nice situation, I think. I like it because it flips the power in the classroom, and I have to come off my high horse and my alleged expertise and like ask questions about things like pronunciation, translation, the place of this, if any, in current Chinese culture and so on. But this semester, it's all American students. Is that right? I better triple check that. No Chinese students, though. So it's somewhat different. And I think I will, like, maybe problematize a little more the appropriation of these Eastern philosophies. Now, I think, and we used to think about it this way, maybe when I was first, like, really launching into Asian philosophy. Rather than cultural appropriation, we thought of it as multiculturalism. And I will say that I think that a relatively legitimate use of materials from cultures that, you know, are far afield from one's own is they may yield tools for critiquing one's own culture or philosophy. I think that reading Asian philosophy shows you that there are many more possibilities for writing philosophy, thinking about these issues. There may be whole conceptualities that never arose in the West, but that give some kind of leverage for understanding the Western tradition and its limitations and critiquing it. And I think that's exactly why there was a fad for this stuff in the 50s and 60s, because people were in a counterculture. They were attacking the values of their own culture, which they associated with racism, sexism, environmental destruction. That was really central to, like, the hippies in the mid 70s who were teaching me at Bonzo Ragamuffin Prep. That's what they were thinking about as much as anything else, was environmental questions, and the human relation to nature, they thought, needed to be completely rethought. And they thought of these Asian traditions as giving resources for that. All right, now, so let's talk about this book, Alan Watts, Tao, the Watercourse Way. Like I say, he's kind of a hippie god. He's probably eating shrooms and stuff like that. I don't know. He was doing some stuff with hallucinogens. British originally, Alan Watts. And, you know, and his, I think the focus of this book, which was published posthumously, actually, and was not complete at his death. The Way of Sound was published in the 50s, but this was published in the mid 70s. Okay, so the central theme, I think, is really the human relation to nature, and underneath it is this environmentalist style agenda. And I think a lot of people kind of went afield from Western philosophy because they felt that the metaphysics of almost all Western philosophy tended to detach human consciousness from the order of nature as something better, something greater, and something different. That is human consciousness, self-awareness, and so on. And they tended to portray, like, nature as this kind of inert set of resources for our exploitation, you know, which led to maybe a capitalist disaster and so on. Okay. So now, how are we going to rethink the human relation to nature? Well, there's all kinds of stuff we might do. Let's do a bunch of backpacking and, like, trying to live off the land and stuff like that. Let's go Thoreau, live in a little cabin by the pond or something. We did stuff like that. I'm still doing stuff like that, man. I live out in the middle of nowhere, actually. All right, but but people like Alan Watts had the profound experience of, look, there are traditions that do not conceive the human relation to nature fundamentally technologically, do not conceive the human relation to nature as an agent using an object that has no intrinsic value except what it does for the agent. The whole universe as means to our ends. If you really want to exit that, it's hard to find the exit in Western philosophy. So people like Watts really, I think, regarded some of these resources as, really profound means of critique. That's one function of it. I mean, one thing is, like, I was trying to read a whole bunch of Taoism over the break, secondary sources on Taoism, and figure out what I would teach in the course. And so I picked this up for probably the first time since the 70s. And I thought, I went into it going like, Alan Watts, yeah, that hippie, whatever, acid trips or whatever. This is quite a scholarly, responsible book. It's state-of-the-art, pretty state-of-the-art scholarship on ancient Chinese philosophy for its period. Okay, it's been, there've been discoveries, reinterpretations since then. But Watts is in touch with, in conversation with the top sinologists in America, all the people that have worked on, and Britain, and Germany, all the people who had worked on kind of assembling a corpus of Chinese philosophy in translation, like Joseph Needham, or Burton Watson, or Giles, etc. Giles, maybe that's too early, but anyway, I was struck as I reread it, like, this is a very responsible and very interesting book, actually. For example, the stuff he writes about the Chinese language and ideographs as opposed to alphabetic languages, ideographic as opposed to alphabetic languages, it's very hippie. But it's also very interesting, and he starts talking about all the ideographs that there are in Western culture. Okay? And now we're working on emojis. I don't know if you want to call these ideographs exactly, but it's an interesting claim that they are. And so then, so one thing that, like, his examination of the differences between Chinese language and Roman, alphabetic languages of the West, the exposure to the Chinese language in which he was immersed, Alan Watts, shows him the structures of Western languages in an interesting way. It optionalizes them. It gives you a different sense, maybe, of what the relation of language to the world is or could be. So I don't know about any particular conclusion that he draws in that long chapter, fairly long chapter in a fairly short book, about the differences between Chinese and Western, or ideographic and alphabetic languages, but it's interesting stuff. But I just thought I'd do a few quotes. He has lovely treatments of central themes of Taoism, like yin-yang, polarity, the Tao, etc. What I want to focus on a little bit is the sort of environmentalist side of Watts's interpretation. Again, I think this shows something interesting about what Asian philosophy means to the West, at least at a certain point, at least to a certain group of people in the West, of which I was a junior member. So let's focus a little bit on the human relationship to nature very briefly. One of my many limitations here is pronunciation. So this, I think we're going with something like ziran. Tzu-jan. Tzu-jan? Tzu-jan. Tzu-jan. I don't know. Maybe I'll try to avoid it. The natural, or again, the spontaneous, the self-so, the self-arising. Like, I guess maybe the images of a flower in a way, like arising of itself or from within itself. That's the picture of the whole system. And that's maybe the etymology of terms, some of the terms that we might translate nature into English as nature into English. Anyway, here's Watts. This is on page 16. Hitherto, Western science has stressed the attitude of objectivity. So it's not like he is, this is suppressed. He's using this directly to attack a history of Western philosophy that he thinks is leading to environmental disaster. So we could think about that. Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, the great German existentialist, I just call him great, he's also a Nazi, has somewhat similar positions, I would say. A somewhat similar critique of Western science and technology, which is ironic if you're a Nazi. But anyway, hitherto, Western science has stressed the attitude of objectivity, a cold, calculating, and detached attitude through which it appears that natural phenomena, including the human organism, are nothing but mechanisms. The mechanical view of reality, materialism in sort of Western scientism. But as the word itself implies, a universe of mere objects is objectionable. He's a witty and a good writer, Alan Watts. A universe of mere objects is objectionable. We feel justified in exploiting it ruthlessly. But now we are belatedly realizing that the ill treatment of the environment is damage to ourselves. For the simple reason that subject and object cannot be separated. Okay, that's a simple reason. But what he immediately goes to is, look, what's gone wrong? One dimension in which Western society has gone wrong is a really wrong metaphysics that separates subject and object, us from nature. Like if you thought about Descartes, locked in the theater of his own ideas, as is Locke, as is Hume, as is Berkeley, as is Kant. All right? And for all those philosophers, the question arises: is there a world? Okay, that's not the question that arises in the Taoist tradition, which is more like, is there a self, actually? All right. Let's start with the world thing. And we're not separate from it. Okay. So, like I say, he's seeing this as leverage on the whole Western tradition, which he thinks is leading us into this cul-de-sac of total destruction of the earth that we live on. So this seemed important to me at the time, and it still does in a way. I mean, I think like you want to change environmental policies in various ways. I think to really deal with this, we're going to have to start thinking of our relation to nature profoundly differently. We are it. We are not separate from it. Right? That's what I feel like I learned a vocabulary for describing that from Taoism. I mean, honestly, I'm reading this book going like, okay, I just wrote, a few years ago, I wrote a giant system of philosophy. Actually, a lot of it came from this. Maybe I forgot that. Okay. For the simple reason that subject and object cannot be separated, and that we and our surroundings are the process. We and our surroundings are the process of a unified field, which is what the Chinese call Tao. In the long run, we simply have no other alternative than to work along with this process by attitudes and methods which could be as effective technically as judo. The gentle Tao is effective athletically. I guess they call judo Do is Japanese for Tao, so I guess the gentle way is maybe judo. As human beings have to make the gamble of trusting one another in order to have any kind of workable community, we must also take the risk of trimming our sails to the winds of nature. For ourselves are inseparable from this kind of universe, and there is nowhere else to be. Even though maybe in Western philosophy we imagined that there was someplace else to be. The theater of our own ideas, for example, our own subjectivities. All right. Now, I'm just going to take a passage or two that describes Watts's account of tzu-jan, or nature, or the spontaneously self-arising. He avails himself of a well, he calls it a Buddhist image. It's also because it appears in Chinese Buddhism, it appears in Indian Buddhism, but it also appears in Indian Hindu traditions, the idea of the universe as the net of Indra, or as a net, or as a network, or as a fabric, or as a tangle. Again, my book's called Entanglements because this is my picture. So, I mean, on 35, he gives a nice history, and he kind of locates this view within the Taoist canon. This book focuses on the Tao Te Ching, the Shuangzi, the Liezi that we're going to read eventually, or parts of it anyway, and a number of other texts, actually, that he has on board, and he kind of locates this thought within that canon. So he talks about a Buddhist school, Chinese Buddhist school, who's no doubt influenced by Taoism, whose image of the universe was a multi-dimensional network of jewels, which again, I'm going to, another image of this is the net of Indra. You could look that one up. Each jewel was a she, or a thing event, or each node. So like picture a fabric with a jewel at each kind of node. Let's make it a knot. That's my image. The jewels are a little too jewelly. I want everyday objects. Every knot that's a node in the string network is a thing event, says Watts. Or every thing event is a knot or jewel at a node at a cross hatch, at the cross hatch, or I don't know, in the weave, the macrame of the universe. And his principle, this is a Buddhist philosopher, Fatsang, each jewel was an event, or was a she or thing event, and his principle was shi wu I. Between one thing and event and another, there is no obstruction. They're all connected. Expounded the mutual interpenetration and interdependence of everything happening in the universe. In other words, the whole cosmos is implicit in every member of it. And every point in it may be regarded as its center. This is the bare and basic principle of the organic view, as opposed to a kind of Western technological view, or technical view, he calls it. Technical versus organic. Now, these are simplistic, when you start associating that with Western and Eastern culture, that's awfully simplistic. But I think one thing that's neat, you can see is what people in the West in the 70s, and I think maybe even still, feel that they need. All right? Because they're going out and finding it. And I think Watts, is fair to say, is actually finding it. That is, it's not that his view of Taoism is utterly distorted. It's quite responsible, and it does provide interesting alternatives to Western conceptuality. I would think that, because I want that too. It functions that way for me. Now, is that maybe that's a narcissistic cultural, like a culture of narcissism that the West has been all too guilty of. Still, I'm going to just stop guilt tripping myself and start seeing what we can do with some of these ideas, maybe, or go back to seeing what we can do. Now, one really extreme difference, in the way Watts is conceiving these Asian traditions and the way he's conceiving the Western tradition, one, difference that he locates are differences around the concept of power. Power, including political power, but also technological power, scientific power over the world. The centrality of power relations, again, to the Western, even metaphysical tradition, are something that Watts thinks needs critique, and he thinks that these Asian traditions that he comes across and immerses himself in can provide tools for that critique. Means of making that critique. And so there is a political critique, and one thing I want to focus on in the Tao Te Ching, maybe we'll do this on Tuesday, I hope, is some of the political stuff. And again, this shows you why the hippies might like it, okay? One reason some hippies might like it. You kind of had anarchist hippies and communist hippies. The anarchist hippies would like this. Communist hippies don't like anything, man. But I don't know how hippie you can really be. But there was a lot of Maoist sympathy in my high school, too. Okay. A lot of reading of Marx, actually, as well. This is not much like Marx, for better and worse. But it is political, interestingly political. In fact, it's the Tao Te Ching is, as many other texts in Chinese philosophy, including the Analects of Confucius, is at least in part intended as advice for rulers, which is also a traditional kind of way of casting a political essay in the West. Like there's a literature called the Mirror of Princes. Like this is how you should conduct yourself as a prince in medieval Europe. At any rate, the human relation to nature, Watts wants to draw this from the deepest kind of metaphysical well, but he also thinks it has, constant practical applications, including politically, in the environmental movement, among other things too, though. It is the basic, this is 43. It is basically to the Taoist view of the world that everything event is what it is only in relation to all others. Now, what does that mean? Let me just give you one little example here. The force of gravity. Everything in the universe that has any mass whatsoever exerts a force of gravity that even in the most minuscule or trace way affects every other object in the universe. Like we are all gravitationally connected. Right? I would say like I'm infinitely related to any given other thing in the universe, actually. Okay, this is not going to work out if the things in the universe are basically our own ideas or whatever. Definitely not. Okay, but no one believes that. Actually, we're in an actual physical environment and we're related to every object in it, right? I'm not some kind of integral thing. I'm a body that takes in food, that continuously breathes and so on. I'm sucking the world into myself and, exhaling myself into the world. I'm not distinct from this thing, man, in a millions or infinitely many dimensions. Stop taking me to be some kind of frigging subject sitting here experiencing the world as like on a screen, and start thinking of me as an actual object in a world infinitely related to all the other objects in the world. That's my advice to you, young people. We're not living in narratives, man. We're living among things. We're not making this sucker up with our own stories, dude. We are objects living among objects, which is a beautiful situation, an infinitely rich web of interrelation among real things. And we are one of those things. We've got to stop privileging ourselves as special things within this order or as things outside this order, like immaterial souls or something like that. Everything is only what it is in relation to other things. The earth and every tiniest thing upon it inevitably goes with the sun, moon, and stars. We're spinning around that sun right now along with the rest of the earth, each of us. It needs them just as much as it needs and consists of its own elements. Conversely, the sun would not be light without eyes, nor would the universe exist without consciousness, and vice versa. Right. The universe would not exist without consciousness. Now, I say he's probably getting that from Hindus or Western philosophers, actually, because I don't see any sign of that claim in Taoism. The universe would not exist without consciousness. But what he's saying is that they're interdependent. Consciousness is part of the system. Okay? This is the principle of mutual arising, Shangsheng, which is explained in the second chapter of the Tao Te Ching. The principle is that if everything is allowed to go on its own way, the harmony of the universe will be established. Since every process in the world can do its own thing. This is 60s, 70s. Only in relation to all the others. Each thing can only be itself, only as and in relation to all the other things. The political analogy is Kropotkin's, Prince Peter Kropotkin's, Anarchism. And probably Kropotkin is the best anarchist philosopher, I think, at least until fairly recently. The theory that if people are left alone to do as they please, to follow their nature and discover what truly pleases them, a social order will emerge of itself. And I mean, I think that you find that in Taoism awfully clearly, actually. We'll see it. Individuality is inseparable from community. Individuality is created in relation. Let's try that. So this is not a way of saying everything is one and destroying all individuals. It's saying that what makes an individual the individual it is the relations it has. So no one has my relations. I'm completely unique individual, even if I'm not anything as an individual. Do you see what I mean? Even if it's all relational, even if there's nothing intrinsic to me, and it's all relational, no other center of relation, no other knot in the web has the relations I do. No other knot in the web has the spatial relations I have to this lamp right here. No other knot in the web. I think I did this before. Yeah, I did in the previous lecture. This is my favorite thought, maybe. No other human being has my parents and my children, right? Because I didn't marry my sister, I guess. Or have children with them. I didn't have a sister. I don't know. Okay, you see what I'm saying? I am uniquely related, and that is what I am, a unique bundle of relations in an infinitely replete universe in which everything is related to everything else in an infinitely rich way. Individuality is inseparable from community. Don't think of those as an opposition. Think of those as a polarity, as a yin-yang. In other words, the order of nature is not a forced order. It is not the result of laws and commandments. And so now he's contrasting this to the Western monotheisms, which beings are compelled to obey by external violence. For in the Taoist view, there really is no obdurately external world. My inside arises mutually with my outside, and though the two may differ, they cannot be separated. Thus, everything's own way is the way of the universe. So as tzu-jan means that the entirety is spontaneously self-arises. Each element of the universe is part of that spontaneous arising. One thing this is an anti-teleological picture of the universe. It's exactly the opposite of Aristotle's metaphysics, for example. It's just like, well, everything has a goal, a purpose, a telos. So the universe must have a goal or a purpose or telos. Of course. Right. This is just a completely different picture of human action in the universe and of the universe itself. It's a non-teleological system, spontaneously arising from within itself, whatever that means. Maybe we can clarify that a little bit. That's a hard one, though. It's an improvisational. The universe is an improvisation. Right? not a law-governed creation by, you know, the dictator, the king of all, or something like that. All right. I just want to say one. What did I do with the book though? Point out one place this goes. I'm going to pause this a second and go get a book that I should have here. But sorry about that. Now I've got the book. I think, and I'd like to get into this quite a bit later. The best account of this kind of picture of the universe as an improvisation, as spontaneously self-arising, as having no purpose, goal, or end, among other things. tzu-jan, is best expressed in Guoshang's commentary on the Shuangzi, and we're going to at least read some chunks of it. It's hard to find a steady translation of this, but I think it's actual classic of Taoism. It comes from, you know, an era 400 years, perhaps, after the text of the Shuangzi. Guoshang is the person who edited and set up the canonical text of the Shuangzi as well. But this is his kind of picture of the universe. If you run into Parmenides, this is has interesting relation to his proof that nothing moves and things like this, the great poem of Parmenides. But it's really, but like I said, I'll get it. I want to do a lot more interpretation on this when we get through the Shuangzi and everything. This is Feng Yulan's History of Chinese Philosophy, Volume 2. The winds, as they blow, differ in thousands of ways, yet all are self-produced. Since non-being, that's Wu, is non-being, it cannot produce being, you. Yet before being itself has yet been produced, it cannot go on to produce other things. What then produces things? Where do things come from? What makes things as they are? What makes things as they are? They spontaneously produce themselves. That's all. Being spontaneously produced, it is not I who produces them. It is not I who produces them. It is not the self that produces them. There is no thing that produces them. And just as I cannot produce things, things also cannot produce me. Hence, I am spontaneously what I am. I would have to work on the spontaneity thing. What's the term there? I know I know this, but now I can't dig it up on my head. That everything is spontaneously what it is called natural. And we are that too. We've separated ourselves from that order, a spontaneous order, only in our imaginations, in our fictions about ourselves. And to be natural means to be made, means to be natural. To be tzu-jan means to be, not to be made to be so. Again, like nothing could be a clearer kind of basic anti-teleological, metaphysical, or ontological framework. To be natural means not to be made to be so. Therefore, everything produces itself and does not issue from anything else. This is the way of heaven. This is the Tao of nature. That's another word that could be translated nature, tian, or heaven, the sky. All right, so that's a little chunk of watts. I think this semester I might do stuff like this, like sort of the secondary sources I might try to do on video lectures, and we'll focus on the primary text more in class. Thank you.